Cut right to the chase. The secret is this. It's a travel journal. And all it is an unbiased log of what you did each day and how you felt while you were doing it. It sounds dead simple, because it is, and yet this is the only tool out of all of the self-help books I've read that's produced lasting change in my life. It's allowed me to keep up with my hobbies whilst working roughly 2 times as much as I used to, while cutting down on incidents of binge eating and binge watching. There are 3 reasons this is so effective, and I really wanted to share this tool because the first reason I'm going to speak about has so much to do with personality type. And to me, I feel like a lot of the self-help books I read were all written for people who were wired differently to me. They were written for people with mystical abilities, like the ability to stick to a schedule and stuff like that. And whenever I tried to play their games, it always felt like I was trying to roll a stone uphill or something like that. And so when I found travel journaling and learned how to do it, it was so freeing to me. In a way, it unlocked all the techniques that I learned in those previous books because it framed it in a way that actually made sense for my mind and my personality type. But before we talk about that first point, let's briefly go over what the technique actually is. There are only 2 necessary aspects of travel journaling: honesty and gentle curiosity. Here's what I do. In the nighttime, when I'm winding down, I grab my cute little Midori journal and I log everything that I did that day, and then afterwards I write up 2 categories. One category titled energizing and fun, another titled draining or not so fun. And I sort what I did that day into each one of those buckets. And here's the vital part. Without judgment, I go through how I actually felt at each part of the day. Whether it was fun, whether it was boring, whether I wish I was somewhere else, whatever. Just give an honest account of the actual feelings you had while you were going through this. We'll talk about this more in just a moment, but the key thing is to not delude yourself, not even for an instant. And that's it. That's travel journaling, the life-changing technique. So what makes it so wonderful? The first reason it's so special has to do with different personality types. Now, you can broadly categorize people as either prospective, that is future-focused, or retrospective, that is past-focused. Of course, everybody is both to varying degrees. However, I believe the DNA of lasting change is seeded in each individual depending on their preference of reflection. I suspect a lot of self-help books are geared towards prospective people because, frankly, it's far easier to write about. When you're a very future-focused person, the scope of possibilities is effectively limitless. They're like a blank slate, unto which the self-help author can prescribe a wonderful new life for them. But if you are anything like me, you might have wasted years of your time chasing your own tail, trying to figure out why these techniques just don't happen to work for you. But this all changed for me once I started taking retrospection seriously. Once I began viewing it not in terms of my own flaws, but rather as something that reveals my actual character. And that's where travel journaling comes in. The travel journal is a holy grail for retrospection. In essence, the travel journal is nothing but retrospection, and this leads me to the second reason this technique is so effective, which has to do with secrets and honesty. Unbeknownst to myself, I had been keeping secrets from myself for years, and travel journaling is what allowed me to see through them. This was super surprising to me, because basically since I was 16, 17, I've journaled extensively and introspected to a somewhat insane degree. However, it wasn't until I started taking an unbiased and neutral log of how I felt about what I was doing each day that I managed to see into some of these secrets. The biggest thing I was holding for myself was the truth of my actual experience. Instead, I would privilege a point of view that I wanted to have. Let's take the example of binge watching content, which is a habit I've had for genuinely as long as I can remember. I can recall coming home from kindergarten and brain rotting before brain rotting was a thing. I was a real innovator. So I've had this habit for a long time, and it caused me a lot of pain because, frankly, I hated that I did it. I really hated that I felt the need to cope this way. I felt as though I was losing my life in content and these streams. And over again, every time I'd have an incident, I'd return to these questions like, why am I doing this? I obviously hate it so much, so why am I doing this? And it was from that assumption that I proceeded. I always tried to solve this problem of binge watching, to try and remove this plague of my life, this thing I don't even like doing, it just happens to take up all of my time. And none of those efforts ever succeeded, because they were based on a faulty foundation, one that I had hidden from myself. Whenever I tried to solve this problem from this point of view, the results would always go nowhere, because there was a lie at the center. I thought I hated this stuff, when really, I was just hating after the fact. I was adding that to my experience and filling my memory with the belief that I hate binge watching. But when I took up travel journaling, what happened was that I could actually see and reflect on how I felt during the day. I could notice that I love binge watching, or I love some parts of it at least. This is where honesty is paramount. You should reflect not on how you want to feel about this activity, but on how you actually felt about this activity. I didn't hate binge watching. I wanted to hate binge watching. I feared that if I admitted that I liked it, that I would start doing it more and more. I couldn't handle the thought of being such a quote-unquote failure. But travel journaling cuts right to the heart of all of that, and this applies to everything that you do. And when you have this perspective, when you rid all fear from the truth, you begin making changes in your life from a far more friendly place. When you habitually lie to yourself, you entrench in yourself a belief that the truth is unsafe. The truth is not something you can actually experience. I'm reminded here of this quote from Dostoevsky. The main thing is stop telling lies to yourself. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lies reaches a point where he cannot recognize any truth in himself or in anyone surrounding him, and so he loses all respect for himself and for others. So by walking back this pattern, by going into the heart of the matter, by going into the truth of your actual experience, your life can start to have lasting and permanent changes. And really, I think this is the reason that travel journaling worked where everything else failed. Because everything else was built on a sea of sands. There was no way to build a solid foundation upon it. Whereas when you have the truth as your base, you can actually start to make lasting and permanent changes. Anything else is simply a panacea or a band-aid. And the third reason this is so effective has to do with how this technique unlocks all other techniques. We've talked about how what this allows you to do is see the truth of your life and see how perhaps some quote-unquote bad habits that you have are things that you actually really, really enjoy. But where do you go from here? Maybe you can admit to yourself that, man, that smoking time was real good, but you still don't want to smoke long term. What happens next? Well, what I found, at least in my experience, this really is only my experience, so take it all with a pinch of salt. I've personally found the methods of people like Alan Carr and Osho to be very effective. In summary, what they're talking about is how awareness is the thing that sets you free. That by having an awareness of what you're doing and how you feel during it, you can come to far more sensible, logical, and reasonable decisions about what to do next. In my own case, the way this looked was that in the case of quote-unquote bad activities, I could essentially just see in very plain terms how these things were serving me. And it was no longer so catastrophic. No longer was I thinking like, oh my gosh, that 6-hour YouTube binge was absolutely ruinous, my whole life is over. I could see quite clearly that, the first 30 minutes at YouTube was actually so funny, but then the rest was like this weird catatonic desperate state. Maybe I should just do half an hour and then forget the rest. When you frame it like that, it seems super obvious, right? And the trick here is that even though it seems like you could have realized this obvious thing before, without the space provided by the travel journal, without the space provided for yourself to be able to sit in truth comfortably, any conclusion you would have come to, even if you came to the same conclusion, might have been coming from a place that was fundamentally judgmental. Whereas with a travel journal, you come from a place which is far more sober. You're simply seeing things as it is. If it was fun, it was fun. If it was boring, it was boring. And this then applies to all of the other, productivity and whatnot techniques I read in those previous books. What I didn't realize was that beforehand, they all had an air of judgment about them. And I tried to substitute them as the deliverer of truth. If I couldn't follow this method they were prescribing, I was somehow wrong. I would have to force myself to fit into that mold. Whereas with the base of truth provided by travel journaling, I can take or leave what I like. I can come to see in much more clear-cut terms, not relying on these books to give me some source of meaning or ultimate truth, and I can take their techniques for what they're worth and leave the rest there. One of my favourite parts of this technique is how you're able to naturally orientate yourself towards your energy centers. By continually logging those things that feel energizing to you, over time, you can just put more of those into your life. Vice versa with things that are draining. You notice a certain situation you get into every single week that just sucks life out of you for a day. You can just have less of that in your life. What's wonderful about the travel journal is it has the space to hold this truth, and a way for you to look back over time and notice trends within these patterns of behaviour. Allow me once again to reveal my stupidity, but previously I had this weird thing where I had things I liked doing and things I didn't like doing but I felt like I should do, and I would kind of try and balance these out, almost like a schoolmaster to myself, like, oh, you get one good thing, then you gotta do this terrible thing. And this wasn't really that effective, it didn't really work or help me out that much. And somehow it took travel journaling for me to notice that, oh hey, I can just do more of what I like doing and do less of what I don't like doing. And this freed up so much energy in my life. Again, perhaps you don't need travel journaling at all for this and you're just smart enough to realize this, but I am who I am. Those things that are naturally energizing are gold mines, because love is limitless. Affection and interest is a better stimulant for focus than any drug or productivity technique can ever muster. This is why some people will struggle to study for 20 minutes, but can get into woodworking or bouldering for like 6 hours because they're into it, they love it. With this technique, you can go more towards those with time. And on the flip side, we're going to talk about secrets once again. Things that are draining are fantastically rich in information. Sometimes the reason something's draining is very simple. It just sucks, or you don't like it. But other times, the reason these things are draining are for an accessory reason. I have a friend who used this to almost completely rewrite his relationship to parties, events, and all these social situations. Previously, he just viewed them as generically exhausting. Not a party person. But with time, he observed that the reasons these things were exhausting for him were actually a compound of factors. Some as simple as he prefers sitting down to socialize, and so if you're at a party where everyone's standing up, it just sucks. Others were much deeper. They have to do with how he allowed himself to show up in those conversations. Previously, he didn't feel like he had permission to speak. Whereas if he went to events, and I believe the thing he said was he tried to meet people's eyes with boldness, confidence, and care. And somehow this magical combination of words helped him to think about how to engage with people in a way that felt much more natural to him, that didn't feel too skittish, didn't feel too intense, it was just right for him. And travel journaling just gets you in the habit of reflecting a bit more on how you felt and why you felt that way, seamlessly bringing more introspection to your life and a bit more critical thinking. A final reason it pays to pay attention to what's draining for you, and I can't believe I saved this point to last, but it's an interesting thing to consider. What is your procrastination protecting you from? On the theme of truthfulness before, sometimes the reason we don't want to do things is, mechanical, it just sucks, it's kind of hard to pay attention or whatever. But other times, it's your whole being sending you a signal. Maybe the reason you keep procrastinating on this big move you're planning is because you don't actually want to move. Or maybe it has something to do with an issue you're having in a relationship or something else. These things are just very complex. And it's travel journaling that gives you the space to think through what is the truth of this experience. And perhaps it's a good note to end on. Travel journaling is dead simple. It's not owned by anybody. You can do it practically anywhere on anything. Even though nowadays I like to do it on this Midori journal, previously I used to do it all the time in my Obsidian, my notebook, or in Apple Notes. That's the video. Thank you lots for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.